They called it Operation Paperclip, and it's the reason America pardoned over 1,600 Nazi scientists after World War II. Men who committed atrocities, men who should have faced trial at Nuremberg. Instead, they got American citizenship, comfortable homes, and celebrated careers. This isn't conspiracy, this is declassified fact, and the truth is far worse than you imagine. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. People dancing in the streets, kissing strangers, celebrating the end of Nazi tyranny. The greatest evil the world had ever seen was finally defeated. But while the world celebrated, American intelligence officers were already in Germany, moving through bombed-out cities, searching through rubble. And they weren't looking for war criminals. They were looking for talent. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency had a list. Names, specialties, scientists, engineers, technicians, experts in rocketry, aerodynamics, chemical weapons, biological warfare, aviation medicine, the best minds the Third Reich had to offer. And America wanted every single one of them. The Soviets were doing the same thing, racing through Germany, grabbing scientists before the Americans could. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about winning the next war before it even started. The Cold War was beginning, and both sides needed weapons. Let me tell you about Wernher von Braun, brilliant rocket scientist, SS officer, the man who designed the V-2 rocket. The V-2 was Hitler's revenge weapon. Supersonic missiles that rained down on London and Antwerp. Over 3,000 launched, each one carrying a ton of explosives. They killed thousands of civilians, people who never heard them coming, because they traveled faster than sound. But here's what's worse. Building those rockets killed more people than the rockets themselves. Von Braun oversaw production at Mittelwerk, an underground factory carved into a mountain, staffed entirely by concentration camp prisoners. Slaves from Dora Mittelbau, a subcamp of Buchenwald. These prisoners worked 12-hour shifts in freezing tunnels, no sunlight, minimal food. If you were too weak to work, you were sent back to the camp to die. If you made a mistake, you were hanged in front of the other workers as a warning. 20,000 people died building von Braun's rockets. He visited that factory regularly, saw the conditions, knew exactly what was happening, and kept pushing for faster production. This is the man America decided to recruit. The operation begins July 1945. President Truman issues a directive. He authorizes the recruitment of German scientists for American military projects. But he adds a condition: no one with Nazi affiliations, no one with war crimes in their past. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the military had no intention of following that order. The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency created Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip. The name came from the method they used, literally paperclipping false documents over the scientists' Nazi records. They rewrote histories, downplayed affiliations, made war criminals look like ordinary academics who just happened to work during wartime. Von Braun's file originally stated he was a security threat to the United States, that he was a potential war criminal, that his Nazi Party membership and SS rank made him unacceptable for recruitment. A paperclip, a new file, and suddenly he's described as someone who was forced to join the Nazi Party. Someone whose primary interest was science, not politics. Complete fabrication. But it worked. More scientists, more crimes. Von Braun wasn't alone. Let me introduce you to more of our recruits. Arthur Rudolph, von Braun's right hand at Mittelwerk, the man who managed the production line where those 20,000 slaves died. He later designed the Saturn V rocket, the one that took Neil Armstrong to the moon. NASA gave him awards, called him a hero, didn't mention the bodies he built his career on. Kurt Blomy, Deputy Reich Health Leader, conducted experiments with plague vaccines on concentration camp prisoners, infected them deliberately, watched them die. America knew all of this, recruited him anyway for our chemical warfare program, gave him a lab in Maryland. Hubertus Strughold, the father of space medicine, did high-altitude experiments at Dachau, put prisoners in pressure chambers, subjected them to extreme conditions to see how the human body responded. Many didn't survive. The Aerospace Medical Association named an award after him. Took them until 2013 to remove his name after his past was exposed. Walter Schreiber, another biological warfare expert, froze prisoners to death to study hypothermia, shot them with poisoned bullets to test antidotes. Brought to America, given a job at the Air Force School of Medicine, only deported after his crimes became too public to ignore. Otto Ambros, called one of the most dangerous criminals at Nuremberg, developed nerve gas for the Nazis, used concentration camp prisoners to test its effects. Sentenced to 8 years in prison at Nuremberg, released early, then hired as a consultant by multiple American chemical companies and the Department of Energy. These weren't isolated cases. This was systematic. Over 1,600 scientists, technicians, and engineers, many with blood on their hands, all brought to America under false pretenses. Not everyone was okay with this. The State Department fought back. They saw the real files, knew who these men were, insisted that bringing them to America violated Truman's order and basic morality. They were overruled. The Justice Department raised concerns, said this was illegal, that it made a mockery of the Nuremberg trials, that you can't punish some Nazis while rewarding others. They were ignored. Even within the military, some officers objected, said this was wrong, that America was supposed to represent something better. Because the people making decisions had already made up their minds. The Cold War was heating up. The Soviets had the bomb. They were recruiting their own Nazi scientists, and America couldn't afford to fall behind. Morality was a luxury we couldn't afford, or so they told themselves. Here's the argument they made, and honestly, it's not entirely wrong. That's what makes this so complicated. Without Operation Paperclip, Soviet scientists might have dominated space and missile technology. The balance of power in the Cold War could have shifted. American security could have been compromised. Von Braun's team didn't just help America get to space. They revolutionized rocketry, created the foundation for satellite technology, intercontinental ballistic missiles, modern defense systems, the entire infrastructure of American technological superiority. The Saturn V rocket remains one of the most powerful machines ever built. It worked perfectly, put 12 Americans on the moon, changed human history. None of that happens without Nazi scientists. And here's the really uncomfortable part. The Soviets were doing the exact same thing. Operation Osaviakim brought thousands of German scientists to the USSR, some voluntarily, many by force. They helped the Soviets build their own space program, their own weapons. So the question becomes, if we hadn't recruited these scientists, and the Soviets had gotten them instead, would the world be better off? Or would we just have a different set of war criminals building rockets for a totalitarian regime, while America fell behind? There's no good answer. Just less bad options. The cover-up deepens, 15 minutes to 18 minutes. But even if you accept that the recruitment was necessary, the cover-up is indefensible. The American public had no idea. For decades, these scientists were presented as brilliant minds who helped us beat Germany. Their Nazi pasts were classified, secret, buried in files that wouldn't be declassified until the 1990s. Von Braun became a celebrity, appeared on television, worked with Walt Disney on educational programs about space travel, was interviewed by newspapers, praised as a visionary. No one mentioned Mittelbau-Dora. No one talked about the tunnels filled with dying prisoners. No one asked why an SS officer was working for NASA. When survivors tried to speak out, they were ignored, dismissed as bitter, or accused of exaggerating. Some were even threatened if they spoke too loudly about what they'd witnessed. The government protected these scientists aggressively, blocked investigations, refused to release documents, claimed national security concerns. Meanwhile, the scientists lived comfortable lives, nice houses, good salaries, respect from colleagues who had no idea who they really were. The unraveling, 1800 to 2100. The truth started coming out in the 1980s. Investigative journalists began digging. FOIA requests, forced document releases. Survivors found platforms to tell their stories. The first major expose was a book called The Paperclip Conspiracy in 1985. It laid out the whole operation. Names, dates, crimes. The public was shocked. Then came the lawsuits. Survivors and their families tried to get justice. Civil cases against the scientists, against the companies that employed them, against the government that brought them here. Most failed. Too much time had passed. Statutes of limitations, government immunity. The scientists claimed they were just engineers following orders, that they didn't know the conditions prisoners worked under, that they had no choice. All lies, but hard to prove decades later. Arthur Rudolph was finally investigated in 1983. Faced with evidence of his role at Mittelbau-Dora, he agreed to renounce his citizenship and leave the country rather than face prosecution. He returned to Germany, lived there comfortably until his death in 1996. Never faced a courtroom. That was the closest any Operation Paperclip scientist came to accountability. Today, if you visit the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama, you'll see von Braun's name everywhere. Buildings named after him, exhibits celebrating his achievements, a statue outside. There's a small placard that mentions his Nazi past. The Saturn V rocket he designed is displayed proudly, the engineering marvel that won the space race. No mention of how he learned to build rockets, or who died making them. This is what Operation Paperclip achieved. It didn't just bring Nazi scientists to America. It laundered their reputations, turned war criminals into heroes, wrote them into history as the good guys. And it worked. Most Americans have never heard of Operation Paperclip. Those who have often don't know the details, don't know about the camps, the experiments, the slaves who died building rockets. We remember von Braun as the man who got us to the moon. We've forgotten everything else. So here's what we're left with. A deeply uncomfortable truth about what America was willing to do to win. We decided that technological superiority was worth more than justice, that getting to space first mattered more than holding mass murderers accountable, that the ends justified the means. And maybe they did. Maybe Operation Paperclip really was necessary. Maybe without it, the Cold War would have gone very differently. Maybe American security really did depend on recruiting these scientists. But even if all that's true, the cover-up was inexcusable. The lies, the rewritten histories, the protection of war criminals at the expense of their victims. We could have been honest. We could have said, yes, we're recruiting Nazi scientists because we have no choice. But we're not going to pretend they're heroes. We're not going to celebrate them. We're not going to erase what they did. Instead, we built them monuments. Let's talk about who we forgot in all this. The 20,000 prisoners who died at Mittelbau-Dora, worked to death in freezing tunnels, beaten, starved, hanged for the crime of being too weak to keep working. The concentration camp prisoners experimented on, infected with diseases, frozen, poisoned, subjected to pressure chambers and altitude tests. Their names mostly unknown, their suffering reduced to footnotes in scientific papers. The civilians killed by V-2 rockets in London, Antwerp, over 9,000 people, killed by weapons built by slaves and designed by a man we later celebrated. These are the people we betrayed when we recruited their killers, when we gave those killers new lives, new identities, awards and recognition. Some survivors tried to get acknowledgement, compensation, recognition of what they suffered. Most received nothing. Many died without ever seeing justice. Operation Paperclip forces us to confront something we'd rather avoid. The idea that America, the country that fought to defeat fascism, was willing to compromise its values when it was convenient. We prosecuted Nazis at Nuremberg, hung them for war crimes, then turned around and hired other Nazis to work for us, made them rich, protected them. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, and it's not like this was the only time. America has a long history of supporting dictators, sponsoring coups, overthrowing governments, all in the name of national security and fighting communism. But Operation Paperclip is particularly stark, because it's so direct, so undeniable. We literally brought war criminals into our country and gave them positions of authority. And we did it knowing exactly who they were. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't incomplete information. The files were clear. The crimes were documented. We just decided it didn't matter. Here's the deeper lesson. Operation Paperclip shows how power operates, how nations justify the unjustifiable. The people who made these decisions weren't monsters. They were intelligence officers, generals, politicians, people who thought they were protecting America, making hard choices in difficult times. But that's always how it works. Atrocities aren't committed by people who think they're doing evil. They're committed by people who think they're doing what's necessary. The Nazis who built concentration camps thought they were protecting Germany. The Americans who recruited those Nazis thought they were protecting America. The logic is identical, and that's terrifying, because it means any of us, given the right circumstances, the right fears, the right justifications, could make similar choices. Operation Paperclip is a warning about what we're capable of when we're scared, when we convince ourselves that our enemies are so dangerous that anything is justified to defeat them. You might think this is ancient history. World War II, the Cold War, all in the past. But the logic of Operation Paperclip never went away. We're still making the same calculations, still deciding that security justifies compromise, still working with people who've committed atrocities because they're useful. Look at our relationships with dictatorships around the world. We condemn human rights abuses, then sell them weapons because they're strategically important. Look at our intelligence operations. We say we believe in rule of law, then run black sites where people are held without trial. Look at how we talk about terrorism. We say every life matters, then accept civilian casualties as collateral damage when it serves our purposes. Operation Paperclip isn't an aberration, it's a template, a playbook for how democracies compromise their values in the name of security. And we keep using it. I'll be honest, when I first learned about Operation Paperclip, I wanted there to be a clear answer. I wanted to be able to say definitively whether it was right or wrong. But the more I learned, the more complicated it became. The Soviets really were recruiting their own scientists. The Cold War really was existential. But that doesn't make me feel better about Von Braun getting to live comfortably while his victims were forgotten. Doesn't make me accept the cover-up, the lies, the monuments we built to men who should have been in prison. I think that's the point. Some historical events don't have clean moral lessons. They have contradictions, uncomfortable truths that force us to sit with our discomfort. The final truth, 39 to 42. So, what's the darkest secret of Operation Paperclip? It's not that we recruited Nazi scientists. It's not even that we protected war criminals. It's that we chose to forget. We chose to rewrite history. We chose to celebrate monsters as heroes because it was easier than facing what we'd done. We didn't just bring Nazis to America. We integrated them into our national mythology, made them part of the story we tell about American exceptionalism and ingenuity. Every time we celebrate the Apollo program without mentioning where that technology came from, every time we talk about American innovation without acknowledging the blood it was built on, every time we remember the space race as a purely triumphant moment in history, we're continuing Operation Paperclip. We're still covering up, still choosing comfort over truth. The question isn't just whether Operation Paperclip was justified. The question is, what are we doing now that future generations will look back on with horror? What compromises are we making today that we're telling ourselves are necessary? What are we choosing not to see because seeing it would be too uncomfortable? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And the rhythm of Operation Paperclip is still playing. We're still deciding that winning matters more than justice, that security trumps morality, that the ends justify the means. And we're still really good at forgetting the people we sacrifice along the way. Operation Paperclip wasn't just about rockets and the Cold War. It was about what we're willing to accept when we're afraid, what we're willing to forget when it's convenient. The Nazi scientists are gone now, dead, beyond accountability. But the logic that brought them here remains, the willingness to compromise, to justify, to forget. That's WWII's darkest secret, not what the Nazis did. We knew that was evil, but what we did after, how easily we made peace with monsters when they had something we wanted, and how little we've learned from it.